So Sony has finally dropped their Pro controller, the DualSense Edge, and we're going to be taking a look at all of the settings and customization options to see if this is a good controller for you to get. At $200 or £200, it is quite an expensive unit, so we're going to be seeing if it's worth purchasing if you're a keen FPS player for games like Call of Duty and Warzone. I have to say, first impressions are good. The controller feels sturdy and it's taking on the same form factors as the original DualSense controller, but it comes in a neat little carry case which you can also use to turn into a charging dock. It also comes with various back pedal options and joystick heights so that you can switch them out for your preferred playstyle. So some of the key features that are going to give you an advantage in FPS games are the ability to swap out the joysticks for alternative heights for better precision, having back pedals so that you can assign buttons to those for easier jumping without having to take your finger off the joystick, and reducing those trigger dead zones so your finger doesn't have to move so far to be able to shoot the weapon. Setup's super simple with the controller. The first time you plug it into your PS5, it will bring up the install wizard and it will help you pick all your settings to match your playstyle. You'll be able to assign profiles to specific controller settings so that you can switch them between games. In this instance, I'm setting up a Warzone profile so that I can get all of my sensitivities and dynamic curve responses in line for how I like to play on Warzone 2. I like to set my left paddle as melee in Warzone 2. I like to set my right paddle as jump because that allows me to jump around corners while still aiming to get that advantage on my opponents. So when it comes to stick sensitivity and dead zone, it's going to take a little bit of playing around and testing out the different settings in the firing range to see what suits you best. But you've got the options of default, quick, precision, steady, digital aim and dynamic, each of which tailor the response curve of the joystick to suit the game that you're playing. And you can assign these to different profiles on your controller. Precision, for example, being really good for making those precise movements in long range gunfights. In this instance, I've left the left hand stick default because that's just for movement, whereas the right stick I've changed to dynamic and reduced the response curve by -2 just to soften that curve a little bit so it's a bit more subtle. One thing that doesn't come with the controller is precision rings, which I have been using for the last couple of years on my previous controller. So as you can see here, I've got that on my right stick, which just helps deaden the movement a little bit and gives me a bit of pushback on the right hand joystick. Also, after a bit of playing around, I've actually gone for one paddle for the right hand side and the new button paddle for the left hand side. I found the paddles to be quite sensitive, and so I found that I was knocking it with my left hand side, so I'd be meleeing in the middle of gunfights, which is not ideal. So I found this mix and match approach best for me. Similarly, I haven't got my trigger dead zones set the same for left and right. I've got a little bit more travel on my left hand ADS trigger because I find that easier to mount, whereas I've got zero movement on the trigger so I can sprint to fire quicker and get those shots off a lot quicker. So there's always going to be a bit of an adjustment period when you've got a new controller, particularly if you're changing joysticks which you've never used before. So I'd always advise getting into the firing range and testing out weapons that you're comfortable with, just making sure that everything feels on point. It took me a little while to hone in the settings and get something that felt quite similar to my previous controller because I was using a Pro controller before. You want to be making sure that recoil control feels doable and then you're not overshooting the target too much and you're being able to snap onto the chest and the head as easily as possible. If you're overshooting the target or it feels a bit too wobbly, then your sensitivity is probably a bit too high, so try playing around with the response curves and dropping down the sensitivity a little bit. Precision rings help me in this instance because it deadens the movement of the joystick and allows me to push a little bit harder on the joystick without getting so much movement on the screen. If precision rings aren't for you, then it might be worth trying out one of the taller joystick attachments. as this will give you a greater range of movement and will be better for those precise aiming moments, particularly at longer range. So jumping in this mode with the veteran bots, they will shoot back, which makes it a good opportunity to really hone in your aim. I'm on polyatomic camos at the moment, so I'm going to try and make sure I get those headshots. As we know from the strongholds in Warzone, the bots love smoke. The paddle's coming in clutch there to be able to jump out the way, a bit of advanced movement. So my thoughts on this controller. So far, really good. The biggest W for this is the amount of customization you can do with it. Obviously I've taken the opportunity and used two different types of back paddle buttons, just because of the way that I hold the controller when I play the game, and that really has come in clutch. I also have taken advantage of the different trigger distances, so I've got a bit more movement on the left hand side, whereas I've got zero movement on the trigger one, so you can get those shots off as quickly as possible, for example when you spawn in front of enemies like that. So is it worth it? I would say if you're using a default PlayStation controller, then it's 100% worth it for FPS games like Call of Duty and Warzone. The ability to be able to jump around corners whilst being able to aim will give you such a big advantage in gunfights, and being able to change the joystick heights will help with the precision. Obviously I don't use that in this instance because I use the precision rings, but it's still great to have the option, and I think that's the key to this controller. You've got all the options that you could want. Another great thing, although it's not the cheapest to buy off the rip, $200 or about £200, it is a bit of an initial outlay, but if you're like me and you get through controller quite quickly with the dead zones, always needing to replace the whole unit can be a pain. But the great thing about this is obviously you can change the joystick system for $20 or £20 rather than having to buy a whole new controller. So really, once you've got this, it should last you for life. I would say that is a mega benefit over controllers like Scuffs or other third-party pro controllers. The only downside I would say is that you can't increase the tension on the joysticks physically, so you have to play around with the dead zones and do a bit of tweaking to make sure the settings suit your playstyle. All in all though, I think this is a big W for the DualSense Edge. Nice snappy movement. So all in all, I would say this is a big W from PlayStation, and the controller is decent. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you want to catch me live over on Twitch, where I play Modern Warfare and Warzone 2, then catch me over at twitch.tv/breakbleep.